Welcome back to Morning Joe. Joining us now, national political correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC and author of The Red and the Blue, Steve Kornacki. Steve, good to see you.
You too, Willie. Happy New Year.
All right, so Happy New Year to you. We've officially turned the corner. It is 2020. We're on an election year officially, we can say. We haven't talked to you since we can say that safely. Let's look at some polls that we have first. The first new polls that we've got for 2020, CBS, YouGov. We've got both New Hampshire and Iowa to look at. What is the state of play right now? Iowa, obviously, you've got a cluster of 4 people effectively tied at the top, 3 literally tied, with Elizabeth Warren not far behind. Where do you see this race right now, a few weeks now before the voting starts in Iowa?
Oh, there you go. And first, thank goodness we have some polls. We've had a month here without knowing what was actually happening out there in Iowa or in New Hampshire. We've had plenty of national polls, but here you go. As you say, 3-way tie there. According to the CBS YouGov poll in Iowa, Sanders, Biden, Buttigieg. I think, look, obviously we've talked about Buttigieg's early strength in Iowa. I think the 2 things that jump out there's a resilience for Joe Biden. I think that was a story of 2019 for him. I think his campaign came with a lot of sort of expectation of collapse. His early debate performances certainly fed that. You're not seeing it. Sanders, obviously, 2 months after the heart attack, tied for the lead there. And then you look over into New Hampshire. Remember, Bernie Sanders in 2016 didn't just win New Hampshire. This was a blowout for him. Next door neighbor from Vermont got 60% here in 2016. He leads tenuously over Biden. Again, resilience for Biden there. Warren, another next-door neighbor. Buttigieg at 13%. But basically, as you say, what you see in those first 2 states, there are 4 in double digits. Buttigieg there in New Hampshire a little off the pace. Warren a little off the pace in Iowa. And a lot of possible scenarios that suggests.
So who do you give the edge to in Iowa? You've got a 3-way tie. I was going to say it's a coin toss, but you'd have to have 3 sides to the coin at this point. Who do you give the edge to as you look at the race?
It's tough to say. Look, you've seen Buttigieg, obviously. He's established himself there early. Biden is interesting because Biden running on this electability message. Yeah. I think 2 things that have been going Biden's way lately are, number one, you continue to see national polls that show him doing better against Trump than any other Democrat. And I think for bottom line Democratic voters who just want to beat Trump, that's the best advertisement Biden can have. Polls that keep coming out looking like that. The other thing I said, Biden's shaky performance early in those debates. Here's the thing not everybody saw coming in June, July, August. He got better.
Yep.
He turned in his strongest performance in that debate just before Christmas. I wasn't sure he could get better, frankly. He did, and if he keeps that up, I think that bodes well for him as well. And then there's Sanders. We say resilient after his heart attack. Here's the thing we're seeing right now. Sanders is starting to go after Biden. So this is the wild card. People have been asking, when will somebody make sort of a full-on attack on Joe Biden? You're starting to see Biden do it in the wake of this Iran news in the last couple of days, and there's a question of how that will play. There's the famous story in Iowa back in 2004. At this point, a couple weeks before the caucuses, Howard Dean, Dick Gephardt were the 2 front runners in Iowa, and they both attacked each other to death. And guess what? John Kerry came up and won.
Yeah, even last night, Senator Sanders going directly at Vice President Biden. Let's look at some of your scenario that you've gamed out. You asked on Twitter how you feel about Biden's chances of winning the nomination if he loses both Iowa and New Hampshire, which could very easily happen. Depends on how you think about the Clinton-Sanders race in 2016. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, I mean, here's the thing. We've been saying this is true in the modern era. No one has lost contested races in both Iowa and New Hampshire and gone on to win the Democratic nomination. Now, there's not a ton of examples there, but no one's actually lost the first 2 when they've been contested and done that. So there's a question for Biden of, hey, if he slips in Iowa, if he isn't able to bounce back in New Hampshire, does that mean it's curtains for him? And I think if you look back at 2016, you realize that almost happened to Hillary Clinton. She won Iowa by 4, they call them state delegate equivalents. This was the closest margin in the history of the Iowa caucuses. It was as close to losing as you can come while actually winning the Iowa caucuses. So she nearly lost Iowa. As we said, she lost New Hampshire by 22 points to Bernie Sanders. She won Nevada by only 6 points. There were plenty of people, I remember caucus day, thinking Sanders was going to pull that out. And if you look at Hillary Clinton in 2016, do you think if she had actually lost Iowa and actually lost Nevada, the bottom would have fallen out? She would have been in a fight in South Carolina. She would have lost a bunch of big states, would have lost the nomination. Or do you think, she still wins South Carolina by 50. She still gets 80% of the black vote. Everything still holds for her. I think if you look back at 2016 and ask yourself how you feel about that, I think that goes a long way to getting towards what you might think about Biden if he slips in those first 2.
Joe?
So there's always the firewall of South Carolina that I always have to talk about, not just because of Joe Biden, but because of the entire Democratic field. Nobody has yet connected with black voters, with rank and file voters in South Carolina and across the Deep South and industrial states like Illinois, where a lot of Chicago votes there. And so that's why I've always thought if Biden does extremely well in Iowa, if he shocks people and he wins Iowa, he's off to the races. He's in great shape. If he finishes third or fourth, obviously, that's another scenario we've been talking about. But let's play out the Bernie scenario. Bernie wins Iowa. Bernie wins New Hampshire. Bernie wins Nevada. Three things that could all happen. And then on top of that, Bernie Sanders actually has the money to advertise on Super Tuesday. So you'll see Bernie ads on Super Tuesday, and you'll see Michael Bloomberg ads on Super Tuesday. And that is that. If Biden then wins in South Carolina and in the other southern states that we expect him to win in, then, boy, what a mess that's going to be. And the reason I say Biden wins South Carolina, even if Bernie sweeps the first three, I mean, Steve, I haven't seen any evidence that Bernie, any more than Buttigieg, is going to win votes in black churches in South Carolina or other southern states.
Yeah, what I'd say about Sanders, when you look at the numbers among black voters, he's getting blown out by Joe Biden. That's right. But he tends to get about 10 to 15% nationally of the black vote. Buttigieg at 0, 1 or 2%. So he's a little bit better there with black voters. He also does, we've seen with Sanders, he does particularly well with Latino voters. And we've seen some polling out of California, one of those big Super Tuesday states, that has Sanders doing quite well out there, powered by Latino voters, particularly younger Latino voters. One other number I think to keep in mind with Bernie Sanders is this. We tend to think of somebody who's a self-described socialist, who's an independent officially. He runs as an independent in Vermont. We tend to think of somebody like that as a factional candidate, maybe has a core of diehard supporters, but a lot of sort of suspicion from the rest of the party. You do not see that in the polling. And I specifically say this, when you ask the favorable, unfavorable question of Democrats nationally, you have a favorable, unfavorable view of the candidates. New poll out this morning, Morning Consult. I think you were just putting some of the numbers up. Sanders is the most popular Democratic candidate nationally, 75% favorable, 16% unfavorable, slightly more popular than Biden right now. So again, you have that scenario of Iowa, New Hampshire, if he could add Nevada, if he could go 3-0, I think it does raise a legitimate question under that scenario if a bandwagon effect takes hold and he builds some strength that he doesn't right now have.
Bernie's looking pretty good right now. I mean, again, you're right. I think he's the one candidate that has a good possibility of winning the first three states. And again, he's got the most money. He's got the most contributors. His campaign, like his heart, very healthy right now, much healthier than many people in Washington thought. Let's talk about that Morning Consult poll. I want to put it up if we can do that, Alex, and look at the Morning Consult poll. And of course, Biden's way ahead. But there you have Michael Bloomberg sitting at 7%, 7% after a month or so of running ads and having staring at ribs in diners. Pete Buttigieg. For all the work, all the positive press, only 1 percentage point higher. And of course, there are just a fleet of candidates below Bloomberg that aren't even on that list right now, who have been working their tails off for a year, and some of them running really great campaigns that aren't close to registering. What does it tell you?
Well, it's interesting. You look at Biden and you have that scenario we were just talking about. If Sanders gets hot early, if that happens, and if part of that scenario is that Biden is seen as just, not just losing, but maybe losing by significant margins in some of these states, I think that is, to the extent one exists, that's the dream scenario for Michael Bloomberg, because he's not contesting Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. He's trying to jumpstart his campaign on Super Tuesday. I think the scenario he's looking for is a party that is suddenly facing a very real prospect of nominating Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, for that matter, and doesn't have Joe Biden to lean on necessarily anymore, might then turn to him in those Super Tuesday states. I think we haven't seen somebody pull that off before, but we're seeing a lot of firsts in politics these days.
There's so much going on. Steve, stay with us. Coming up, John Bolton says that he's willing to testify in the Senate impeachment trial. But it is clear that the president's defenders don't want to hear anything Bolton has to say. Plus, we'll talk to the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez, about the answers he's demanding on the president's decision to kill Iran's top general. Morning Joe is coming right.
We're coming back with the rage. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.